All right. Hello, everybody, and thanks very much for coming to this second happy hour. For context, for those who are listening in to the recording, happy hours are a way of connecting people who are building Holochain apps with a developer in the Holochain team. It's an opportunity for the teams to get feedback on their designs, get questions answered, maybe do some code review, whatever the team needs to get unstuck to continue working on their project. And the intent is that everybody who's participating in this Zoom session and watching afterwards will be able to get something out of that too. They'll be able to apply the patterns that they talked about to their own projects. So in this episode, we are featuring the Humm.Earth team. A month or two ago, Humm.Earth blew us all away by producing an actually functioning Holochain app on a website using the Holochain Go prototype, which was meant to be a toy, a proof of concept, so that people could see how Holochain was supposed to work. So they've actually got a running demo application for the world to see. So that's really exciting. Nick and Pedro and Henry are here to talk about some of the design issues they're facing, specifically around access, like circles of privileges, who gets to see what things, who gets to change records, who gets to participate in this network or that network. So yeah, that's basically it. Nick, would you like to take over?
Yeah, sure, Paul. Thanks. So we could get right into those questions, honestly. They're pretty universal. But to give a little bit more context on why they're really important for us, I'm going to give a little walkthrough here to explain more of what we're doing. So what we're creating is, or what we're aiming to create is both a collaborative and a personal publishing application rolled up into one, essentially. So you can think of kind of Google Docs meets Slack meets like Wix or Squarespace or WordPress or something along those lines. So we have history in publishing websites and a lot of teams of writers and things, and this is something that we've always wanted to create, essentially. So what we're looking at here, this is a prototype, which is kind of your own personal space. This would be handled, it would pull some information in from some DHTs, but you can run this off of your own personal chain, your private chain. But you have a place here to where you can write and create. So you can add new stories, just like any sort of publishing platform. You can add a new story. You can access stories that have already been created. And these can either be yours or you can push them to shared spaces is what we're using. So this also has like a navigator into different shared spaces where you will actually be able to collaborate on shared documents and chat and with other people who are also using Humm. So you would come in somewhere like this. This is all very rough, just more for visual purposes than anything. So you'd be able to access shared documents, shared discussion. So there would be like a general discussion, and then within each document, you would have discussion and comments and different editing features. And then the big thing that puts this above or builds on top of something that's really familiar in this area, which is collaborative document handling, is that the Holo network allows us to then turn something like this into a publication and actually put it onto the web instead of copy and pasting from Google Docs and then talking in Slack and then putting it into WordPress or some other CMS. The idea is that we can then launch our shared space as a publication. And again, obviously this is very rough because we don't know exactly how we're going to be able to work on Holo, the Holo network or anything, but something along the lines of add some boxes. I don't know. Again, we're gonna have something set up to where this process of hosting your Hum Holochain application as a website will be streamlined. So fill in whatever you need to fill in. This is a very rough, so we don't know what this looks like. And then you can launch a publication. So you can actually then access editor tools and everything and have all the collaboration and be publishing directly to the web, directly to your Holochain application. And again, through Holo hosting and then through a peer-to-peer application. So it's combined with those. All of those features as a very base. So the way that we're potentially planning on handling this is what you just saw will be handled. So one thing you have your personal space. Everybody has their own personal space on their private chain in the network. And then you're going to need to have a central marketplace, so to speak, to find other people. So you don't have to connect to this DHT if you don't want to, but if you want to connect with other people, you can find friends, shared spaces, and then potentially in the future, you can find and transact for work, content, digital assets, things like that with other people that are in the system. So from this, you can find someone, connect, and then launch a shared space, which is its own DHT, where you can share content, chat, and creative agreements, and then potentially handle payments and things once all that is available. So the different types of, this is where this gets into really important for us, is talk of quote spinning up new DHTs, because this is very integral to what we're doing here in shared spaces, or planning on, because you're going to be able to spin up a shared document, which is going to be potentially its own DHT that we'll have within it. In that DHT, it'll handle the actual content, comments, chat, edits, version history for those specific document. And then handling channels of chat, direct messages, all within the shared space. And then creative agreements, which are scope of work and payment handling and all that kind of thing, all those things. And that pretty much covers the front end and back end structure of what we're currently planning. And this is where we kind of get stuck, because we don't know what these functions actually look like. Like Art has said several times about that, in quotations, spinning up new DHTs to handle, talks about HoloChat. If you want to create a direct message or a group channel, you can spin up a new DHT, which would be a copy of that, just with different user permissions. But we haven't heard anything concrete, I guess, on how that works. We've dug into the current HoloChat code, and that is all handled on one DHT, so it doesn't do that currently. Of course, understand that that's not how it's going to be in the future, potentially. But I guess we could open up and talk about that, if there's any talk in the dev team or any ideas for how that'll be handled, or if what we're planning here makes sense from what will be done. We're also kind of, just as another kind of indicator of where we are, we have been coding in Proto, and we are currently just starting to dive into learning Rust so that we can refactor and then get going in Rust. So we don't have a lot of technical code related questions today, because we're kind of in a transitionary period. So this bigger picture stuff is going to be useful for us. So with that, you could open it up for discussion.
Sure. So maybe I can chip in here. So actually, this is a really great time to be asking this question, because I'm kind of working on this stuff as we speak. The idea of spinning up new DHTs. Also, I really like your architecture. I wanted to say that first up. I think this idea of like the smaller DHTs is the way to go forward. The kind of monolithic, just a single shared space with different people all interacting in there is not going to work out. I don't think it's going to scale particularly well. But something like this, I could see working extremely well. So I think you said you've been working with Proto mostly, right?
Yeah, that's all of our code that we've done is in the Proto version, and that's what the blog that we launched is in. So we're just setting our sights on learning Rust right now to be able to refactor what we've done and start going forward.
Cool. So like, I guess an important change that's been made between Proto and the current version is the idea of the Holochain container. So in the Proto version, basically every DNA, when you used, what was it, whatever it was, HCDev run or something like that, that would, ingest some Zone code and then start kind of serving up your endpoints. Whereas in the Rust version, there's a Holochain container binary, which has a configuration and will take all of the kind of DNA or HC packages that you want to run, and it will serve all of those for you. And this is where this idea of spinning up a DHT comes into place. So the interface to the container is either via WebSockets or HTTP. And you can use that to call any of your Zone functions, but you can also call some specific container admin functions. So over HTTP, for example, from your web front end, you could request the container to list all the installed apps. So that's currently implemented. But what I'm working on at the moment is actually requesting the container to either install a new app from a HC package file, or there's something called install with template. So that's where you would have a template DNA or template HC package. And it would also take a object of properties, which might include a new ID if you just wanted to change the hash, or maybe some other things in that properties file, which would change the behavior of the zone or of the zones or the app. And all of that's readable from inside the zone code. So if you create a new thing with a template, effectively that's how you spin up a new DHT. So you would be responsible for writing the creative agreement template and the chat channel template and the shared document template. And then your UI would make calls to this container with a template plus some properties you want to add. And as long as those properties are different, you'll end up with a different DNA hash and then therefore have a unique DHT. Yeah, does that make sense to you?
Yeah, that does.
Cool. And yeah, like I did a lot of the work on the current HoloChat. And yeah, you're right. It is all monolithic at this stage, but obviously has the intention of having a very similar model to this, such that basically, maybe not every channel, but certainly every channel that you wanted to keep private and not just let anybody add themselves to, would use this approach to spin up another template and then, create a whole new DHT space to be used with that. And all of this is still accessible via the same HTTP or WebSocket endpoint as the container. Everything's just namespaced by the name of the app, which you can actually set when you request an install. But also, like all things Holochain, it's not ready yet.
Okay.
Yeah. Any other questions relating to that while we're on this kind of topic?
So I would assume there's going to be, it would just be necessary for there to be some sort of UI element to where you can set permissions, I guess, for that as you're spinning it up. So like add this person and this person and this person, and then
Right. So that would be something that you as the developer would probably have to manage yourself. I can imagine a pattern where in the properties object, you would just give a list of agent key hashes, which are allowed to join. And then in the Genesis, you would just verify that whoever's trying to join actually has one of those permitted hashes. But I don't think there's any kind of inbuilt functionality for permissions in that sense.
Okay. Well, because I'm trying to understand this. So the idea of the membranes, is this what we're talking about? Or because I haven't seen much talked about membranes yet, like apart from like high level kind of theoretical stuff. But is this what you're asking, Nick? Or
I'm not
as in
sure.
like the permissions of like who can actually have access to that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, when people in the org talk about membranes, it's definitely a very high level concept.
Yeah, but does it like flow down to like actual technical specific things? Like, because I've seen in the zone sort of macro that you can in the functions it says capabilities, but the moment you just leave that as public, but I don't know what else it can be. So
yeah, I don't think that's really the place to be blocking people from actually joining a particular DHT. Like you have to do that in the Genesis function, well, the Genesis callback, I should say.
right.
And really, like, you know, whatever logic you put in the Genesis callback defines your membrane around the DHT. And that's the only real way for doing that. As for the capability stuff, I'm probably not the right person to ask about that. That's gone through a few changes lately. Maybe Paul, you might be able to chip in on that one.
Okay, sure. So from what I understand, the capabilities is basically a way of creating some access controls around who can actually run an agent's Zome functions, who can actually reach into their DNA and do stuff on behalf of that agent. So these capabilities would be handed out to the GUI running on the agent's machine, or perhaps a scheduled task that runs every night, or if it's some sort of like headless agent that, you know, maybe processes transactions or cleans things up.
Right.
So yeah, that like you're saying, Marcus, is pretty stubbed out right now. There's not a lot of features, but what's going to happen is that it's a collaboration between the container and the Holochain DNA itself that manage what sort of outside agents sitting on the user's machine are allowed to actually operate on behalf of the user. So that So like Willem was saying, it's not so much for controlling who gets into
it. Yeah, it's very different. Yeah, I get that.
Yeah.
Cool.
And so
but that is cool.
Yeah, I think one of the things I want to distinguish is that there's different sorts of access controls, and to map it onto, say, what we're used to with like server-based things, where one server has control of the entire data set, and they can choose who gets to see it and who gets to edit it and who gets to delete it. Those are all sort of, you know, individual permissions that the server is able to manage. With Holochain, when a person joins a DHT, they're partly responsible for holding copies of it. So we can't prevent anybody from looking at any one piece of data. So it's the sort of membrane around that DHT space that controls the view permissions, I guess you could say. And then, as Willem was saying, it's the validation rules that look at an attempt to modify or delete an entry and say, and apply certain rules. Like, for instance, maybe only the original author is allowed to delete it, or maybe everybody's allowed to delete it, or maybe only the people that the original author has designated, like maybe the link from the document to 3 people who are allowed to edit it, that sort of thing. So yeah, that's how you do the right edit and delete functions.
I think that was an important distinction, that the membrane around like view access takes place at the Genesis kind of DHT level. And once you're in there, even if you can't interact with anything, you can potentially view, everything, or at least a random chunk of the data that's stored in there. So if you're wanting to prevent view access, you really have to do it at the point where you're joining the app.
Okay. So as far as like membranes go for like who's allowed in and out of a particular DHT, is that based on whether someone just has the DNA, like they know the DNA file, or can you actually can users actually push people out, or that's decided like early on that like there's literally only 2 people allowed in that DHT or something?
I guess you could have hard-coded logic as to who can join, like once you've obtained the actual DNA itself. But you can't boot someone out once they've joined. Like, I think this is all taken place in your local machine, right? Like once you load the DNA code into the container, and then that will call into Holochain and trigger the whole Genesis thing. And that's the only point, I believe, at which the code, like the WASM code inside the DNA can say that this user can't actually continue any further. That's my understanding at this point. Okay. So there's no way to kick people out, I don't think, but you could limit someone's ability to modify things.
Right. To act within the space, or like, right. or could they like, I mean, as in they wouldn't be able to even do like GET requests, for example. So like they essentially wouldn't have access to it from like a UI standpoint. I'm just thinking like, because I've been looking more into the idea of like commons as sort of like these like dynamic entities, and how it could be preferable or desirable in some circumstances for the people to be able to kick people out and stuff. So I just think it's an interesting thing to ask. That's all.
Yeah, for sure. So I guess, I can definitely think how you could stop someone from having like write or like modify access, but I can't think of a way to actually kick someone out such that they could no longer join again. I don't think it's possible, but maybe we can ask some other people about that.
I think it's not possible now, but I think we intend to expose some of the more, I don't want to promise what we intend to expose, but some of the more underlying sort of warrants against people kind of structures to allow a group to possibly kick people out at a later date after the function.
Might be able to prevent you from receiving any new data via gossip, so you might be stuck in stale data forever or something.
Right, in limbo.
Yeah, exactly. That would be the consequence. Yeah. You could still see stuff, but you wouldn't be able to participate anymore. So, Nick, I'm just curious, do you feel like these are kind of taking us in a good direction? Do you want to explore some of these some of the finer details of this in depth?
Yeah, this is actually a really good conversation. It's given me, like, being like a publishing platform, like this idea of who has access, because it's one of these things to where potentially you don't want every single part of a publication team to have access to all the different parts. So the like maybe something is sensitive, or something is just not ready for eyes yet, or you want some people to work on something. So like you're saying, if I understood you correctly, William, like you're talking about like hard coding in the Genesis function, like who has access. So like I guess it would be important to have that. I'm not sure if you mean like it has to be like hard coded, like everyone that is a part of the space has access to this when it opens, or like dynamically populated, as in me and agent number 2 are opening this space. There's 10 agents, but agent 1 and agent 2 have access to this document or chat or whatever. Because I mean, if you're doing a direct let's say a much simpler example, like in Holochat, if you're doing a direct message, I guess, yeah, I don't know. Is that?
Yeah, I think the second thing you said sounds like the more correct one. So when you're, I guess, instantiating with template, or I think is what we're calling it. So when you're taking the template, which would have, no limitations, or maybe, by default it would let everybody join or whatever, but you would add some extra properties to that, which would change the hash. So it's forked it up from the other one. But also you could have the Genesis function read in these extra properties that you added at instantiation time, to define who's allowed to join then. But then after that, after you've instantiated, it's just set to whatever it is. So if you want to make another one with a different user accesses, you have to fork again. That's the only way I can think to do it right now. And I think that's a pretty good way of doing it.
Yeah, so potentially before we get too far down the development roadmap, if this is a simple feature from the beginning, like if you did, let's say, invite 3 people and you only wanted it to be 2, like you could potentially even change or delete what's in, or mark as deleted what's in there, fork to another thing and kind of restart it, to kind of hack around it.
So like maybe if you use like a Facebook chat or Holochat kind of analogy, like you can make a like a private message group with a fixed number of people, but you have to define it all at the start. And if you want to either add someone new or kick someone out, you have to make an entirely new group with those people. And that would then not have any data. So that might be a limitation that you might come up against.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think to go back to what I was saying, I think like it sounds to me like the Genesis, like using the Genesis function as the way to do this sounds a bit like rough at the moment. But like if you could do it in a more softer way by like not allowing people to make certain requests, and you can update that at any time maybe, or
well, so
who gets to update it though, right? Like we're all equal.
So
ideally,
the idea that we were kicking around was that kind of might help in this situation would be, so when you're creating here, if you're creating a shared space, you would actually you would create the shared space and then invite people to it. So it wouldn't be generated with permissions inherent or intrinsically within the Genesis, but rather you would create it, and it can be only yours if you want to. So you can like handle a document on your own, but then you can actually invite people to it and then potentially tag permissions to those people as you invite them. So I don't know if that's different or does anything, but
well, Willem, the idea, because I've heard from David a long time ago, the idea that if you create a new version of an app, you can pull the DHT data forward to the next one. Could you do something like this for that?
I wonder. That stuff's so rough. It's a real challenge, actually. The idea of upgrading. I'm trying to think what we're calling them right now. DNAs, I guess. Upgrading hApps. So say you wanted to change some of the validation logic or add new functions or whatever, but still carry across from your old run. It's actually a really challenging problem. We're still deciding how it's going to be done, I think.
Okay. But because I do think that would be an interesting solution to this, where when you create, like if maybe there's like they've got a sharing, like collaboration space with 3 people, they want to add a new person, so you fork that with that extra person added into the Genesis function, and then you pull that data forward.
Yeah, for sure. If there was working upgrading, that would be like the ideal way to do it. So yeah, I guess I'm not sure who I could talk to who's most clued in about that. It seems to be one of those things that is put on the back burner a little bit at the moment, because like no one is kind of pushing for the need to be able to upgrade apps, because no one's actually made an app that people are using that might need upgrading. if you want to upgrade something, you just kill it and then start it again, because chances are there's only you on it there. But yeah, I think that's part of the push for our dog fooding. Like we want to get, so we're using Holochain as our team communication thing, so that when we do have to upgrade it, everyone's majorly inconvenienced. So actually push for adding in the upgrading logic.
Yeah.
Henry had a question. If you want to talk, Henry, about this is completely unrelated, but it's another thing that we've been talking about. So Henry, if you wanted to talk about this.
Sure. Using Holochain Proto, right now in our Hum application, when we want to show post, we load the post. But right now we're loading the post, but we're not limiting the quantity, because when you query the Holochain DNA, it just pulls all the entries. But right now we don't have that case. But we were thinking, well, what will happen if we have, I don't know, 500 entries, 1,000? Currently we don't have a way to limit the quantity of entries we are retrieving, and we haven't found a way to do it yet with Holochain Pro. I found that interesting because Holochain Rust version will have some ways to handle that, how many entries you will have, or will have more stuff you can do with what do you want to get from the DNA. That's
so to clarify, that's by doing a get links call or something like that? Like you're retrieving this from the DHT space, right? Not from the local chain.
Yeah, the DHT, getting entries from the DHT.
Right. Yeah, we think about this a lot. It's eventually, it's the same as upgrading, right? It's eventually going to become a huge problem. So let me think. Especially in Holochain Rust, it's going to become a problem, because once you try and load more than 64K of memory into the WASM runtime, it runs out. So if you were to get more than 64K worth of links, you're out of luck. For now, obviously. So there is one pattern we were going to use in HoloChat but never got around to.
This thing,
because
Bob?
it's all quite small right now.
Oh, sorry.
So, everyone can hear me okay?
Yeah.
Didn't, because obviously the chat app's very small right now. And another reason for dog fooding is that we want people to hit up against these limits and see the problems. But we did have a system which used a linked list of anchors effectively to represent pages. And then so instead of having one particular hash, which you would link every single message off, say, you would have one hash which you link a bunch of messages on, but then this would link to another hash which you would link another set of messages on. And you'd kind of have this list. So you could traverse that to effectively get the messages in chunks. And then when you're adding to it, you would kind of traverse it to its end and then add them on there. Or if you detect that it already has too many on that, you would create a new one and link that together. But we use that actually in Holochain Proto for our minus sweeper app, if anyone's seen that. And it seemed to work okay, but we haven't yet used it in Holochain Rust, so I can't comment on how that would work. But I think some kind of pattern like that seems to be the go for now, until there's something, that would wrap that up for you. It's like querying all the links is kind of a tricky thing in itself. From what I have heard, I don't know the details too much, but it sounds like it's not trivial, finding all the links within one of these DHTs.
Well, yeah, I think it's querying a hash table. So
it's never going to be easy.
To group, let's see if I understand. You could group entries by using a specific hash to link, let's say 100 entries, and then the next 100 entries, you will use another hash just to, in a way, to group them.
Yeah, and you would possibly link those together with a different tag, so you could tell if you were going to a new base hash or if you were actually retrieving an entry. I consider this would obviously be really easy to understand visually.
Oh yeah, visual will help a lot. So then you will be querying those hashes you created for querying all those entries. So is that in like a layer of where to search the entries?
What was that, sorry?
I'm thinking about the grouping the entries. So let's say I want to group entries by 10. So I create a hash to link all those entries to it. No more than 10, only 10. So for the next 10, I create another hash. And so there will have to be a way to automate that process. Because you will need to be creating for that.
You could obviously just write the logic in your Zome to do it. But, maybe that should be something we do in core. It's set something up like that so developers don't have to worry about it.
Yeah, it seems like setting something like that up in core would be very valuable because there's a lot of applications where you're needing to query, even just for HoloChat, you go back into it, can't load, let's say 15,000 messages between you and someone else every time you try to load it up,
Where were we?
So what are you say link repos? I don't think I heard correctly.
Yeah. The library that I developed that I talked about in the first Holochain happy hour. I'm pretty sure you could do some kind of paging scheme with it. You would just use two different tags, and it would just be like doing a linked list in locally with any other language. You just kind of link one page to the next. You could even do it fractally to break it down where you could have pages of pages, and you could just swap out different tags whenever something got overflowed, like the number of links went past a certain limit. You get a new page. You swap the tag that says this is a member of the page for this is a page, and you sort of fractally do it like that. And I'm pretty sure you could do it.
Yeah.
So if you want to look over at the
logically as well, and then you would have a kind of rudimentary indexing tree.
Right.
But the trouble is, because the Holochain DHT is monotonic, you can't rebalance the tree, so you might end up with a really bad query tree. But
you can do that.
Yeah, definitely thinking along the right lines, though, right? Like linking everything onto one hash is not going to scale.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that won't scale well now.
It's also
you're
the user who has to store that hash, because you also have to store all the link metadata. So you might just be unlucky and have to store like the one hash that everything links to, and everybody else has to store nothing. It's a bad pattern.
So you're saying if you have to store anything that is linked to, you have to download all of the links as well? Or what it's all linked to? Or?
Apparently only the address that it links to. So you don't actually have to store the entry it links to, just the address.
Okay.
I only learned that a couple of days ago, actually.
Well, right now I'm thinking of ways I could make it simple, not so much going to fractals. That not sure how I'm thinking like creating hashes of a date. So let's say from this date, we'll all the next entries, and when the 10 entries complete, create another. But those hashes will be for very specific queries. Like, okay, I want the last 10 hash entries from this chat room, for example. If I want last 10 for another thing or anything else, I will have to create another link for that, another hash for that. So I will have to prepare the queries I want in the future before all of them are created. It's just thinking it now in a very simple way. Maybe a fractal, as you were saying, will be a more better approach to it. Because this way I'm thinking you will have to think of the queries you will want to make in the future. So you can go and store them in the hashes, linking them in the hashes.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And it's kind of a pain. Sometimes I just think that, like that's the price we pay for having this amazing distributed data structure. Is that like, well, I guess we have to define all our own queries and think about that. Because you don't want to be, I mean, like, a relational database or whatever is kind of just building all those index trees behind the scenes for you. We don't want to have to do that if you don't need to, because then everybody in our network has to store that for no reason. So it kind of makes sense that, you have to work to get this kind of like lookup ability.
But it's not impossible to do a new kind of query that you didn't think of before, right?
Well, you're thinking. So like,
but yeah, just as you say to look them up. That I got to remember of lookup tables. There will be a way of storing all the, let's say, well, it will be the same as I just taught now, but making it more seem like a lookup table. So like, I'm looking for entries on, I don't know, some date, looks into this group of entries or hatches, where to search for entries that were done in certain date. I don't know, 2 months ago, you go for that date, and that will be like a hash table. That will be the lookup table.
kind of like a hash table.
There will be where you go for if you want to query or that set of entries. That specific.
Yeah, it was thinking such a data structure would have to be resistant to attack as well. So obviously in a true agent-centric style, you can decide what the time is. I mean, like, if you're committing messages that are getting either timestamped by your web UI or timestamped by the Holochain backend, which I'm not sure if it's possible. I mean, you can tweak your system time. And so effectively you could create messages from any time, and you could create millions of messages all with the exact same timestamp to load up one of the lookup things and effectively cripple the the query ability. So that's something we need to think about as well.
I actually had just on that point, an interesting discussion with that young bloke making Comet, which was meant to be the Reddit clone, but we were talking about like actually having valid timestamps and stuff, and like instead of having to rely on your own device or some central authority, it's like, could you have some kind of like mix-in, which is essentially its own app where you have agents all just like basically shouting out the time from their computer, and then you just take like the average or something, and that's the time that you import in.
I mean, an average is pretty susceptible to attack. I think you need a consensus algorithm, right? What blockchain does really is have consensus on time. So maybe we need to have something like that going. But that's a really cool idea. I like the idea of a time service. Yeah, cool.
Like a clock app, essentially. That's all it is.
Yeah,
it's like an oracle.
It seems like that would be very helpful. Is that something that we could implement as a core service, or is that?
I don't know. I like, that's the first I've heard of it. Very, very interesting.
I think I'm a bit out of my depth, and it's all querying stuff. But what's kind of best practice now for querying? Because like I know, like I'm still kind of new. There's that Anchors app that I think that Eric made, but I'm not quite sure how it works. I still haven't fully understood the Anchors thing.
In Proto or in
Yeah, I think it was for Proto, right? But I haven't seen anything for the Rust. But it says provides functions for easy storage. So the anchors are used for a quick lookup to linked entries in the DHT. So is that kind of what we've been talking about? Or?
Yeah, I mean, like an anchor, the anchor pattern is like very simple. It doesn't really need its own app or Zome or anything. An anchor is just a hash that you know where you hash to get there. So like, you know, if you agreed that the string, you know, messages, if you take that and hash it, if you agree that that's where all the messages go, that's an anchor. There's really nothing to it. It effectively just means that everybody's agreeing that, you know, by hashing this string and getting an address, we should put everything there. Rather than, you know, it just gives you like a known point in the DHT that everybody agrees upon, so you can all go there to either add things or look at things.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's where you link the entries. So that will, that, as you said, that's again, that was what we were talking earlier. So you can create a hash and make that the anchor make that at the fixed point, the agreed point where to look for those kind of entries. That's a way you can also do hashtags. You can search for like in Twitter, you have a hashtag, go to cat hashtag. You search that hashtag with links and anchors.
Right. Okay. Okay. So what does this fractal stuff look like that we mentioned? That David mentioned.
Putting everything on one anchor like that is effectively or eventually going to not scale properly.
Yeah.
So maybe the idea that anchor would point to some other hashes, which would then contain some subset of the data, and then maybe they would point to other hashes, which would contain other subsets. So you would kind of spread it out that way. It's not an easy problem. There's a few research papers on doing like indexing on top of distributed hash tables. And maybe if you're all interested, I could link some of them after that. But yeah, the real trick is that it's a monotonic DHT, which makes it even harder because you can't rebalance and readjust these things after you've created them. So you have to get them right the first time somehow. But yeah, I'm glad we're talking about this actually. It doesn't come up very often.
What's the question? Like, IPFS or something.
Yeah, I mean, like, I think there are two distinctions compared to your regular old DHT, and I think one of them is that it's a monotonic DHT. So once you make modifications, you can't change them ever. There's also the fact that it's validated. So it's a monotonic validated distributed hash table. So every operation has to go through some form of validation, whether that's like, you know, posting an entry at a new hash or whatever. I mean, you know, marking one as deleted. The third point is that the entries have some associated metadata. So that's where the kind of CRUD status would be stored. So that's where you can actually mark entries as deleted or, you know, as modified, and then it will contain a hash of the modified entry, for example. And that's the metadata is also where all the links are stored. So that gives you the extra kind of bells and whistles that the Holochain DHT has, which is you can link entries together by this links metadata, and you can sort of delete and update things by marking them as deleted or updated, which is stored in the metadata at an entry. And then, you know, you can interpret that how you choose. So that's the main distinctions that make it special in the Holochain DHT. Does that answer the question? Person to ask about that, but that's my working knowledge.
Cool.
What about the Holochain testing in the Holochain Rust version? I see the new command line has command for HC test, but how to kind of I haven't had a look at it yet. How does it look like? Because in Holochain Proto, you had a test suite, but it was declaring all your sums or your all just the test you were going to do in a JSON file. Like if you were expecting a hash, you put the syntax is percent h%, and if you want the next hash h1 h2 and consecutively. On the new Holochain, Russ, how does testing look like? You will still use JSON files, or will it be like you can create custom functions to test functions?
Yeah, great question, and I share your pain with the Holochain proto tests. They were less than ideal. We actually wrote our own testing framework that worked with that when we were in the intern house because we got so annoyed with it. And that's actually what went on to inspire the Holochain Rust testing framework, which I guess kind of has two parts. So you can write Rust tests using just the Rust language, like testing setup, which are okay for unit testing, like non-Holochain functions. So if you just have some Rust functions that happen to be in there, you can test those without actually having to call in via the Zome interface. But the equivalent of the proto ones is now just a JavaScript test framework. In fact, you can use any framework you like. Because there is a Node.js container. So if you remember, we talked about the container, which is what loads up the DNA files and provides an interface to them. So you can call the functions and they'll work. There's one of those that runs inside Node. So from your JavaScript code running in a Node engine, you can load a Holochain package, or a DNA package, I should say, and then you can call functions on it and it will return responses. So that's pretty useful. I think it's going to find uses outside of the testing framework. But what it does mean is you can just write tests. I think we normally use type, but theoretically any JavaScript testing framework, and you just treat Holochain calls just like function calls, and it will resolve it all behind the scenes for you. So it's excellent. If you like, I could show you some examples of some tests. I have some actually up right now.
That'd be very cool.
Cool. All right, well, let's have a look.
Sounds way nicer than the current.
It's so nice. All right, let's have a look. It's okay. It's not too small or anything like that.
Yeah, it's perfect.
So this is for like HoloChat, but we're providing a HoloChat backend to another web service that exists somewhere. So it looks pretty much like this. So let's go all the way to the top. Ignore the GraphQL. We're just loading the tape test framework, and we're loading a container from Holochain Node.js, and we're using the bleeding edge version for now, but there'll be a release, I think, this afternoon, so we can just use the regular version. And then so with that container object, you can load and instantiate a bundle JSON, which is a DNA file. So we could look at that as well real quickly. It might be quite large, actually. Yeah, it's probably a couple of meg. We might not look at that. But effectively, that's the Holochain DNA. So whatever's in this JSON file, if you hash that, that's your DNA hash. So we load and instantiate a file, and that gives us an app, which we can start. And then we can just make calls to it. So we can say app.call, that's the zone, capability, and function, and then the parameters. So we can just call register with the name and avatar, and then the result, it just returns the JSON object, so you can check that everything's okay or whatever. And then here we're calling another function called GraphQL and passing a GraphQL query, and verifying that it correctly returns the API version. And similar for these, like here we're registering, and then trying to retrieve the threads, which are like channels for your messages, and then just verifying that we got the response that we wanted. So you can see that this is pretty similar to the JavaScript testing that you'd have for, modern web development or anything like that. It's a pleasure to work with.
Yeah, brilliant.
The old stuff.
That's way better than the current.
That's great. Yeah.
Nice. That's very cool.
And that all gets scaffolded out for you if you create an app using the new HC tool. It will kind of create that test directory and some kind of empty tests, so you can get up and running pretty quickly.
Oh, that's really nice. Yeah, I can't wait.
We want to make it fun for developers. Like that's the
Yeah,
important.
yeah.
How much of the interface is available from Node.js in the Rust version?
Sorry, could you repeat that?
It looks like you have kind of a lot of access to the Holochain API from Node there. To what degree, just devil's advocate, let's say I want to write an app with no Rust at all. I just want to use Node.js. To what degree could I do that? Could you manipulate it from Node?
It kind of, it's like a container, right? So you can only call functions that are already written in Rust inside the DNA from the outside. So what you have in Node is actually an interface to the Holochain container API. So you can call any of the functions you would call on the container normally over HTTP or WebSockets, but just directly from Node, and you get the response directly in Node. So you can't really go any further with apps. All you can do is call existing zone functions. I mean, maybe if you really, yeah, it's not a good idea. You have the same interface that you would have to the container normally via WebSocket. Yeah, did that answer that question? I'm not sure if I was very clear there.
Yeah, no, that makes sense to me.
Okay, great.
Sure. If you would like to learn more about Hum, go to Humm.Earth, and you can see our working prototype of a blogging application built on Holochain. If you go to Humm.Earth/blog, you can sign up for email updates anytime anything new is posted to the blog, and we're writing about our journey as we build this out from a team that knew nothing about distributed hash tables or anything to hopefully a working, useful Holochain application. So yeah, go to Humm.Earth and check us out. Thanks.